This video was made possible thanks to Olafly, offering unlimited data for your next trip in seconds. More on that in a moment. Japan has taken a decisive turn to the right. The new Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, embodies everything many Japanese people wanted to counterbalance the Sanseito, the ultra-conservative and nationalist party that shocked everyone with its massive surge in the last elections. We're talking about the fourth Prime Minister in just 5 years since 2020, who does not hesitate to show herself as a great admirer of the late former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was in fact her political mentor. Although she is Abe's political protege, Takaichi identifies more with another political figure.
Inspired by Thatcher, Sanae Takaichi becomes Japan's first female premier.
And no, the comparison with Margaret Thatcher is not just because both were the first women to lead their countries. Takaichi is already being dubbed the Japanese Iron Lady, and seeing who her mentors have been, it's not hard to understand why. Check this out. The Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP, has been the dominant force in Japanese politics since the end of World War II. Since its founding in 1955, it has governed almost without interruption. It only lost power for 2 brief periods, between 1993 and 1994, and following the Great Recession, between 2009 and 2012. In other words, they weren't even full terms. In short, the LDP has been almost synonymous with government in Japan. So much so that the major political debates did not take place between parties, but between the LDP's own factions. And which faction did the new Prime Minister belong to? None other than the Seiwa Kai, Shinzo Abe's group. Well, belonged because in 2024 the faction dissolved. Remember this because it will be important later. And yes, we're talking about the most nationalist and conservative wing of the party. Now do you understand the comparison with Thatcher better? Sanae Takaichi opposes same-sex marriage, wants more immigration restrictions, and advocates a hard line in foreign policy, particularly with China. But that's not all. She's determined to create national champions, capable of competing with Beijing in strategic sectors, such as semiconductors, rare earths, and batteries. And, not surprisingly, she wants to shift supply chains to reduce dependence on the Asian giant. Now then, if she doesn't play her cards right, she won't be compared to Thatcher. She'll be compared to Liz Truss. Do you even remember her? You know, Boris Johnson's successor who promised a budget revolution and ended up resigning in record time after losing the confidence of the markets in a matter of weeks. She couldn't even outlast that iceberg lettuce. In fact, until a few days ago, it wasn't even clear that Takaichi would even become president. The LDP is not going through its best moment. It only controls 196 of the 465 seats in the House of Representatives. But that's not the worst of it. In the brief interval between her election as party president, following Ishiba's resignation, and her being voted as prime minister, her main coalition partner broke ranks. And it did so bluntly.
We are scrapping the coalition agreement with the LDP and bringing an end to our relationship.
Keep this point in mind. Komi Ito had been the LDP's key partner for 26 years, not only as a parliamentary ally, but also as a counterweight to the party's more hardline and conservative positions. Visual politic community, remember one thing. Japan is the 4th largest economy in the world, behind only the United States, China, and Germany. And not only that, it's also the largest foreign holder of US debt. In other words, what happens in Japan does not stay in Japan. It has global repercussions. Because the land of the rising sun is a key player in the Pacific. That's why it has been forging an increasingly close alliance with Washington and Seoul for 2 years, although it hasn't always been an easy road. So the questions are clear. Who exactly is Sanae Takaichi, Japan's Iron Lady? Why has her party's historic partner decided to turn its back on it at the worst possible moment? And above all, what will be Japan's new course on such sensitive issues as the economy, defense, and its relationship with China? Well, let's find out. Before we dive in, quick question. Have you ever traveled abroad and then suddenly realized you're out of data or you're stuck with crazy roaming fees? Yeah, I've been there too. That's exactly why I started using Olafly's eSIM, and honestly, it's been a lifesaver. If you're not familiar, an eSIM is basically a digital SIM card. No shipping, no swapping tiny cards. Just install it instantly. With Olafly, you can get connected in over 200 destinations with unlimited data, and setup takes less than a minute. They'll send it straight to your email or even WhatsApp. The best part, No hidden fees. A lot of providers trap you with limited packages or extra charges, but with Olafly, it's one simple plan. And if your trip suddenly runs longer, you can easily top up so you're never left without connection. My favorite thing, you can keep your regular SIM card and your WhatsApp number, which means staying in touch with friends, family, and contacts is super easy. Plus, Olafly has 24/7 customer support with real people, no bots, ready to help you out anytime. They've already sold more than 10 million eSIMs worldwide and have a 4.5 rating on Trustpilot with more than 57,000 reviews, so you know you're in good hands. And whether you're headed to Japan, Italy, Mexico, the US, or pretty much anywhere else, Olafly's got you covered. So if you want to travel stress-free, stay connected, and ditch surprise roaming fees, definitely give Olafly a try. Check the link in the description below to get a 5% discount on any plan and destination with your next purchase. And now, back to our topic. To understand where Japan is headed, we first need to look in the rearview mirror. Since Shinzo Abe left power, the LDP has been on a downward spiral. It governs with a weak and shaky minority, and clearly no one can hold out like that. That's why Ishiba, the previous prime minister, lasted barely a year. Japan is a country with an aging population and with politics that rarely excite. But don't be fooled by that calm, because even so, Japanese politics is a powder keg. Ishiba is the perfect example. The trigger for his downfall? I doubt it will surprise you. The economy. Take note of this fact. In August, just 1 month before his resignation, wages in Japan fell by 1.4%. Yes, it sounds bad, but what's really serious is that it was the 8th consecutive month in which workers lost purchasing power. And as if that weren't enough, the markets began to turn their backs on Japanese debt. Remember, Japan is the most indebted country in the world. Its public debt is close to 240% of GDP, a mountain of bills that keeps growing. Until recently, this didn't seem to matter. Why? Because the Bank of Japan was buying up almost all of that debt, and interest rates were at rock bottom. Free money, basically. But that's over now. The Bank of Japan no longer has the fuel to keep the cart moving. Its goal now is to clean up its balance sheet, and to do so, it will reduce its purchases from 3.5 trillion yen to just 2 trillion, and the markets have simply lost their appetite for Japanese bonds. The result? Well,
Japan 10-year yield near 17-year high amid political uncertainty.
Add to all this the fact that the price of rice has skyrocketed in the last year, and you could probably imagine the widespread anger. The Japanese were in no mood to celebrate. Far from it. And it's right in the middle of this economic storm that Sanae Takaichi takes the helm of the country. But she does not arrive empty-handed. She has a plan. And it's not just any plan. The new Prime Minister not only inherits Shinzo Abe's conservative profile, she also wants to revive his economic formula, the famous Abenomics. What does this consist of? Abe explained it with a very Japanese image. 3 arrows. The first is a monetary bazooka, printing yen without fear as if there were no tomorrow. The second, a good shot of public spending to stimulate the economy. And the third, the most complicated, structural reforms to improve business productivity. Or as Takaichi herself says, she wants to return Japan to the top of the economic world, an ambitious goal to which she is willing to pull out all the stops.
The goal is achieving economic growth, not fiscal health.
For now, Takaichi has promised to tackle the rice crisis without a tax cut. The problem is that her own party is not on board and does not want to take measures that would overly damage the fiscal balance. What's more, she has attacked the Bank of Japan for raising interest rates to curb inflation. In her words, it was a stupid decision. But does she really have any room for maneuver? Many are beginning to doubt that the Iron Lady is, in practice, as strong-willed as she appears in her speeches. And they aren't saying this on a whim. There are 3 reasons, 3 key clues that suggest Takaichi will lead a much more moderate government than she promises, at least in economic terms. Because in other areas, such as immigration or relations with China, the course seems to be going in the opposite direction, tougher, firmer, and more confrontational. So let's not waste any time. Let's dive right in with these 3 clues. Takaichi wants to launch Abenomics 2.0, and that's despite the fact that the original was already quite controversial. But the important thing here is not whether Abe's plan was the best or the worst. What matters is that today the context has changed completely. When Abe came to power, $1 bought 80 yen. Today, more than 150, and it's rising. In other words, the yen has depreciated by almost 50%. Printing money like there's no tomorrow may make sense if your currency is overvalued, but doing so when it's already in the gutter, that's another story. And Takaichi knows this. One of her key messages during the campaign was precisely that. Japan is attracting tourists and immigrants because the yen is too cheap. But that's not all. When Abe launched Abenomics, Japan had a strong currency and a chronic problem: deflation. Yes, it sounds strange, but prices falling month after month is not always a good thing. In fact, many economists say that deflation is as bad or even worse than inflation. These days, however, Japan has an inflation rate of 2.7% that may seem low to other countries, but for Japan, it is high. Very high. And what would happen if Takaichi applied Abenomics 2.0 in this context? Exactly, an even weaker yen and more inflation. In 2012, that might have been useful. Today, it would be like throwing gasoline on the fire. That's why, in the final stretch of the campaign, she began to tone down her rhetoric, because it's one thing to make promises and quite another to govern. And even more so when you don't even have the full support of your own party. Because yes, the LDP is a party, but in reality, it functions as a federation of factions, and most of them are against increasing the deficit. So now you may be thinking, if Takaichi advocates policies that the LDP does not support, why on earth did they elect her as leader? Great question. And that brings us straight to the second point. We already told you, the LDP has been in decline for years. Its governing coalition, which is now also broken, we'll get to that in a moment, barely had 220 seats compared to the opposition's 242, and its popularity is at rock bottom. In this context, Sanae Takaichi, with a 35% approval rating, seemed less bad than her rival, Shinjiro Koizumi, who was stuck at 25%. When you have an absolute majority, you can afford internal debates. But when you're on the ropes, what you need is a face that wins votes. Of course, just because she's been put at the head of the party doesn't mean she will do whatever she wants. That's what the new LDP vice president, Taro Aso, is for. Aso was prime minister for less than a year, between 2008 and 2009, but that's not the important thing. What matters is that he still wields a lot of influence within the party. In fact, it was he who tipped the balance in Takaichi's favor in the primaries, and that's why he now holds the crucial position of party vice presidents. It's no coincidence. Unlike Abe or Takaichi, Taro Aso belongs to the much more moderate Kokuchi Kai faction. And although his time as prime minister is long gone, what is really relevant is his role as finance minister under Shinzo Abe's government. Because this data goes largely unnoticed, but Abe reduced the fiscal deficit. What's more, he brought it down from 8% to 3%, as you can see on the screen. But wait, didn't we say that rampant public spending was one of the 3 pillars of Abenomics? Yes, indeed, but you know how it is. What you promised during the campaign is one thing, and what you actually do once you're in government is quite another. And even more so when there are several factions within your own party watching you closely. Among them is Taro Aso, who has taken it upon himself to scrutinize every line of the budget. And pay attention to this. If Aso managed to keep the deficit in check when Japan still had room to borrow, print money, and devalue the yen, imagine now when there is much less room to play with fiscal fire. So everyone is expecting the same thing, that he will once again act as a firewall. By the way, would you like a piece of information that seems like a twist of fate? During Shinzo Abe's term in office, yes, the ultra-conservative and nationalist politician, the number of immigrant workers in Japan doubled. Now, once again, the context has changed. Although there are compelling reasons to believe that Takaichi will not be able to implement her economic program to the letter as far as immigration goes, the story may be very different. Why? The key lies in the new set of alliances that now define Japanese politics. In 1999, a new political player emerged in Japan, supported by a secular Buddhist organization with considerable social clout, Komeito. For 20 years, Komeito and the LDP were like a political marriage, united by necessity, but not by ideas. Because let's not kid ourselves, they didn't think alike. Komeito is, broadly speaking, more progressive than the LDP. It advocates more open immigration, more public spending, is much more opposed to nuclear power, and advocates advocates a foreign policy that is, let's just say, more friendly toward China. But like Sanae Takaichi herself, this couple divorced due to political friction. Although Takaichi ended up remarrying, we'll see what happens with Komeito and the LDP. And it was a rather bitter divorce at that.
Japan's Komeito leaves ruling coalition, dealing blow to Takaichi's LDP. The breakup of the coalition, which previously worked together closely in elections, also means the LDP will no longer receive support from Komeito in future elections.
What was the official reason for the split between Komeito and the LDP? Well, in theory, there are two main reasons. The first, the new LDP president is too conservative and nationalistic. A clear example of this is her controversial visits to the Yasukuni Shrine. This is a place where Japanese soldiers who died in World War II are honoured, including more than a dozen war criminals on par with the worst Nazis. Do you understand what this means for some Asian countries? It would be something like if the German Chancellor visited, or had visited in the past, a place where fallen Nazi soldiers are venerated, including a few SS war criminals. I know it's outlandish in Germany, but in Japan, places like that do exist. In fact, this issue remains a thorn in the side that greatly complicates relations with China and South Korea, two countries that suffered atrocious crimes at the hands of the Japanese Empire during the Japanese invasion and colonization last century. Now, here's the curious thing. For years, Komeito supported the government of Shinzo Abe, who also visited that shrine, and he was not exactly more moderate than Takaichi, at least in his speeches. Furthermore, this year, Takaichi decided not to visit the shrine during the autumn festival. More signs that she is moderating her stance. So it doesn't seem that this was the real reason. The second argument sounds more convincing. Corruption. Specifically, the corruption that has tarnished Abe's faction. Remember we said this faction was dissolved in 2024? Well, the reason was this: an illegal financing scheme through which the faction received 3.5 million euros from various companies and never declared it. But wait, there's more. Remember the assassination of Shinzo Abe? The young man who pulled the trigger didn't do so because of ideological differences. He did it because his mother had donated the entire family inheritance to a Korean religious sect with which Abe had very close ties. And then it was discovered that not only Abe, but dozens of senior party officials had more than murky relationships with such organizations. So yes, Komeito had reasons to jump ship. But beyond the official justifications, there's one reason that stands out. Today, the LDP is the Titanic, just after it hit the iceberg, and no one wants to stay on board. Komeito had always had a very loyal electoral base, but lately it had begun to erode. So, from their point of view, it was better to try their luck from the opposition. And now comes the critical question. If the LDP is in the minority, and its traditional allies have turned their backs on it, how on earth did Sanae Takaichi manage to be appointed Prime Minister? Here's the plot twist, the key to this whole mess, and something that could shape Japan's political future. The LDP's new best friend is called the Japan Innovation Party. Or, if you prefer its original name, Nippon Isshin no Kai.
LDP, Ishin sign agreement for coalition on eve of Diet vote.
With 35 seats in the lower house, the Innovation Party even surpasses the LDP's former partners, the Komeito. It has 11 more seats than them. Yet, even with this new alliance, they still fall short of a simple majority. They are only 2 votes short. And bear in mind that Japan is not France. Things are somewhat more manageable here. But even so, Takaichi will find it difficult to push the laws through, especially if Komeito decides not to lend her a hand. Now, let's get to the important stuff. What kind of party is Isshin? The Innovation Party? Well, given that in Japan all parties are more or less centrist, never forget that, Isshin is almost the polar opposite of Komeito. While its former allies were more inclined toward public spending, more open to immigration, and soft on China, Isshin is just the opposite. They advocate for a small government, public spending cuts, a tough stance on immigration, and a firm position with Beijing. And not only that, they want to rewrite the famous Article 9 of the Constitution, the one that prevents Japan from having an army as such. Takaichi also wants to abandon radical pacifism, but that would require a 2/3 majority in parliament and a national referendum. Impossible, at least given the current political map. That's why we said that Abenomics 2.0 will be slowed down, but when it comes to immigration and foreign policy, goodbye to the counterweights that Komeito provided. For now, the LDP and Isshin have agreed on a 12-point program. Some points are still up in the air, but there are proposals that do not go unnoticed. Here are the most significant ones. create a Japanese doge to audit public spending and cut anything it considers inefficient, lower social security contributions to reduce the burden of the elderly on the budget, and this gem, make Osaka the second capital of the country. Okay, capital is a figure of speech, but it's not so far off the mark. Ishin emerged in Osaka, calling for more autonomy and decentralization, and between the Expo, the new alliance, and the political momentum, they are closer than ever to achieving those goals. What's more, there are other crucial factors. Both the LDP and Ishin are advocates of nuclear energy. Remember that Japan shut down its power plants after Fukushima, although in terms of radiation, the disaster only left one victim at most. Since then, the price of electricity has skyrocketed. This is a tragedy for a country that lives off exporting industrial products. It's similar to what Germany has experienced with Russian gas, but stretched out over more than a decade. And there's more. Another point on the table, banning companies from continuing to finance political parties, a practice that often takes place behind the scenes. Perhaps Ishin will manage to break one of the red lines that the LDP never dared to cross with Komeito. And yes, it is true that Ishin will not be in the government. The 18 ministers in the cabinet will all be from the LDP. But make no mistake, this does not mean that the alliance is fragile. In fact, it was Ishin itself that said, "Thank you, but we don't want seats."
Although Prime Minister Takaichi proposed their inclusion, the Innovation Party reportedly conveyed that due to the lack of administrative experience among its members and the early stage of cooperation with the LDP, they would focus on policy collaboration from outside the cabinet.
So, what can we expect from the new Japanese government? Well, Sanae Takaichi is unlikely to be Margaret Thatcher, but she won't be Liz Truss either. And as much as she wants to spend wildly and print yen as if they were supermarket flyers, the reality is different. She's alone. Neither her party nor her new partner supports her in this, where she will have more leeway than her political godfather, Shinzo Abe, is on immigration. Although, to be honest, there are no major reforms on the table for now. In foreign policy, the path is much clearer. Japan will continue to increase defense spending and strengthen its alliance with the United States and South Korea. She has also hinted that she wants to promote the Quad Group, along with India and Australia. Everything points to this being one of the government's key priorities. And what about South Korea? It's true that the nationalist rhetoric of Abe's faction has caused more than one diplomatic scrape with Seoul, but it hasn't prevented the two countries from strengthening ties. In fact, they are more coordinated than ever, but we'll soon find out. Be that as it may, now it's your turn. Will Takaichi be able to last the entire term, or will she resign early like most Japanese prime ministers? Are we entering a new era, or will the LDP make peace with Komeito, and will everything go back to the way it was before? Will we see Japan take the Chinese issue even more seriously? If you found this video interesting, give it a like, and see you in the next one. Take care, see you soon.